They're abolitionists. And
Yeah, what's a Whig? Yeah. Really, the only thing you need to know about Whigs is that they're anti-Jackson. That by far and away is the most important aspect of the Whigs. Other than that, they're not really unified by anything other than hating Jackson. So there you go. All right, so let's pursue something else. Let's do the United States versus Amistad. And then we're going to double back and do Texas. Let's do Texas first. Texas. Let's do Texas first. All right, so this should be big number H, I think. Does that sound right?
F.
F? Someone said F? Someone said F, and I believe them. All right, so let's go with F. Big number F stands for the Republic of Texas. Now, we talked briefly about this on the last test. There was like one question about Texas on the test. But basically in 1836, Texas gets its independence from Mexico. Texas had been filled up with Americans just moving in, and Mexico had just let them move in. And then the Americans all declared their independence. They get their independence from Mexico in 1836. They promptly apply for statehood, at which point the United States says, no. Right? The United States says, no, thank you. We don't let Texas in. So why did we say no to Texas?
Because they're a slave state.
Right. Because at this time, the Senate was split 50-50 between slave states and free states, and they didn't want to let Texas in because it would have given the slave states a majority. You get used to saying that because that is going to be the regular refrain for like the next 10 states. All right, next 10 or 15 states. So instead, Texas isn't part of Mexico anymore, but they also can't be part of the United States. The US says, well, you could just be a territory of the United States, at which point the Texans say, screw you and your territory. We're going to make our own country. So Texas forms the Republic of Texas. And for 10 years, for 10 years, they exist as their own country, the Lone Star Republic. Right? The official name is the Republic of Texas, but they call themselves the Lone Star Republic. Right? For every new state, you put a star on the flag. Well, they weren't allowed in, so they got their own flag and they got their own star. That's why their flag has one star on it. That's why they're called the Lone Star State. Stephen Austin, right here, he's considered the father of Texas. He's usually called the father of Texas. He lived in Texas. He commanded troops in the Texan Revolution. He beats Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto. San Jacinto. It's Sanjacinto. San Jacinto. Cito. Anyway, so Austin wins the troops there. He runs for office, but he gets beaten by Sam Houston. Sam Houston's from Tennessee originally, but then moved to Texas. He was the governor of Tennessee while Jackson was president. Houston had been in charge of expelling the Cherokees out of Tennessee. And he was very good at his job because there's no more Cherokees there. And then after that, he moved to Texas. He becomes the first president of Texas. Sam Houston does. Austin becomes his Secretary of State, but unfortunately for Austin, he dies of pneumonia. Houston's going to live a long time. He's going to live to be like 70 years old. So he'll live for quite a while. But this is where we get Austin, Texas, the capital, named after him, and Houston, Texas, the largest city, named after him. All right, so let's deal with something else. Let's go to big number G. Is that right, G? All right, big number G, the Amistad Affair. You can call it the United States versus Amistad. I would call it the Amistad Affair. The US versus Amistad is the name of the Supreme Court case. All right, so Amistad, the Spanish word, you guys know what it means? No habla español? All right. Arevalo, you don't speak Spanish? With a name like Arevalo? Well, all right. I don't expect Bala Krishnan to speak a lot of Spanish.
Actually, I'm in IB Spanish, and I'm really struggling here.
Wah, wah. All right. Well, I'll help you out. Amistad means friendship in Spanish. like amigo, amistad. Right? Amigo is a friend, amistad is friendship. All right. So ironically enough, the Spanish ship named, it's the name of a Spanish ship, and it's a ship that is illegally capturing slaves. In a moment of Spanish irony, they named their slave ship Friendship. Wah, wah. So at this point in time, the transatlantic slave trade is illegal. It's been shut down. It's illegal. The Spanish have what I would classify as a flexible relationship with the law. A flexible relationship with the law, which means that the Spanish are illegally capturing slaves. So the Amistad captures slaves illegally, and it's on its way to Cuba to bring the slaves to Cuba. And on its way to Cuba to bring the slaves to Cuba, and during the journey, there's a slave revolt on the ship. There's a slave revolt on the ship. One of the slaves gets out of his chains, kills the guard, takes the keys, opens up all the other ones. They kill most of the white people except for two. They leave two of the white people alive, and then order those two white guys to sail the ship back to Africa. So the slaves don't know how to work a ship. They don't know how to navigate. They don't know how to, work the sails and work the steering and all that stuff. They don't know how to run a ship. So they keep the white guys alive to do that. But then they tell the white guys, as soon as you get us back to Africa, we'll let you go. The white guys, they know that they can't go back to Cuba. So instead, they go north and they head to New York. Right? The white guys know that they have to sail somewhere. So they tell the slaves that they're heading to Africa, and the Africans don't know any better. Right? So they sail to where, the ocean changes color, the temperature is different, the birds are different, right? Like the Africans can tell that they're sailing, but the Africans had spent the journey in the basement of the ship, in the hull of the ship. So they never actually saw anything. So they don't know what it looks like. So they know that they're traveling, but they don't know that they're traveling north to the United States. The Amistad shows up in New York City, and and then the New York Coast Guard there, they stop the ship before it lands, and they say, New York doesn't allow slaves. New York, they tell the Spanish this. They said, New York doesn't allow slaves. If we have you pull into the harbor, these guys are going to be free. So the New York Coast Guard helps the Spanish guys sail it to Connecticut instead. Connecticut still allows for the ownership of slaves. So they land in Connecticut. Connecticut is anti-slave. They don't have slave. They only allow slaves if you own the slaves and bring them in from somewhere else. They don't allow like selling slaves and keeping them there. So the slave ship arrives in Connecticut, at which point the New York Coast Guard traveled with them and turns them all over. So all the Africans get arrested and put into chains again. At this point, abolitionists in Connecticut find out what's going on, and they decide to represent the Africans in court. Here's the deal. Immigration law at the time doesn't really exist. There isn't really a solid immigration law. Mostly, if you arrive on a ship in the United States and just kind of say that you're an American, you're an American. Like if you intend to move here and you just show up, they let you be an American. You're an American, right? There isn't like a big process of paperwork or anything like that. It just isn't. You're just there and you're an American now, right? And so the abolitionists make an argument that because the slave trade is illegal, these men were captured illegally and therefore aren't slaves. That they were not captured as property, they were kidnapped as men. Right? That's the legal argument that they make. And they say because these Africans were not legally captured as slaves, they should be instead treated as immigrants. They should be instead treated as citizens with rights. Right? How's that legal argument sound? It's a pretty good legal argument, I would say. The lower courts say no. The lower courts all say no. The lower courts say, nope, they are property, they are slaves, they are owned by Spain, send them back to Cuba. That's what the lower court says. Okay? They get appealed up. It goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court, John Quincy Adams defends the Africans. Former President John Quincy Adams, right? Former President John Quincy Adams, he defends these guys and he says, you know, we remember what his dad did. What's the famous court case that his father had done? Oh, no.
Boston Massacre.
The Boston Massacre. And who did John Adams represent?
The soldiers.
The British soldiers.
British.
Right? And John Quincy Adams says, my father dedicated his life to justice, and my father defended the people who were even unpopular and deserved justice, and yet still deserve justice, even though they were unpopular. I too will deserve the people who deserve justice. I will defend the people who deserve justice, even though they're unpopular. Right? So John Quincy Adams is following in the footsteps of his father. At this point in time, the founding fathers are all dead, right? But John Quincy Adams is a former president and maybe the most famous lawyer in the country. Maybe, right? I mean, it's hard to be more famous than a former president, right? That's especially a former president with the last name Adams, right? So the Supreme Court rules in favor of the Africans. The Supreme Court rules in favor of the Africans and tells the United States to send them back to Africa. The Supreme Court rules and says they were caught illegally, they are not slaves, send them back to Africa, not Spain. Hooray, right?
There's a plot
right.
twist.
There's a plot twist. Here's the mixed message. Okay? The good news is the slaves go back to Africa free. That's good. Here's the bad news. The Supreme Court rules that the Africans cannot be citizens because they say Black people can't be citizens. So this particular batch of Africans is okay, they get sent back, but what does that mean for all the free Black men, free Black people in the country? What does it mean for someone like Frederick Douglass, who at this time is one of the most prominent abolitionists in the country? What does it mean for him? Right? Frederick Douglass, you know, owns property. He lives in New York. He's made money. He writes books. He travels. He makes speeches, right? Frederick Douglass is the leader of Abolitionist Society. What does it mean for him? It means he can't be a citizen. This Amistad case defines that Blacks can't be citizens. And this case is going to be the reason why we need to have a 14th Amendment. Okay, we're going to get to those amendments after the Civil War, but I want you to put it in here right now because I want you to be able to link it to the idea, okay? When future you starts looking through your notes, I want you to be able to make the connection. Okay, after the Civil War, we're going to pass three amendments to the Constitution, 13, 14, 15. 13 ends slavery, 14 defines who is a citizen, and 15 says that all citizens can vote. All men, male citizens can vote, right? And they're called the Reconstruction Amendments. They happen after the Civil War. We're going to spend some time with them. We'll do like a formalized lesson on them when we get there. But for now, in your notes, but this is the connection to the 14th Amendment, the Citizenship Amendment. All right, do we understand Amistad, you guys? Do you have questions or problems or comments with Amistad? Amistad's tricky because it's kind of a happy ending, kind of, right? Like it's a pretty good story. It's a pretty interesting story, but it's kind of a happy ending. But the problem is it has a really long-term effect as we build up towards the Civil War. it's going to become a real problem. All right, let's jump ahead. Let's meet a new president. President number 11, James K. Polk. For this header, this is going to be H, right? Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So big number H, I want you to put James K. Polk and the Mexican-American War. Because basically the only thing Polk does is the Mexican-American War, basically. So he runs on the platform that he runs, basically the only issue he runs on is that he promises the American people that he will take over California, he will bring Texas and California into the Union, and then he will leave. And so he runs for one term, takes California over, and then leaves. That's what he runs for. And then he's actually quite popular at the end of his term. People want him to run, and he says to them, being the president is the worst 4 years of my life. I don't want to do it again. Goodbye. And he just leaves. Which, I could imagine that. I can imagine being the president is probably a pretty sucky job. I mean, it's nice. They play music for you whenever you walk into a room. That's kind of nice, but it's also kind of sucky. He's kind of sucky. His nickname is the Dark Horse. This is where you get the term what a dark horse is, because he came out of nowhere and he enters into the race. Nobody knew who he was, and he came out of nowhere and ran, right? This is why a dark horse is somebody who wins that you don't expect to win, where the term comes from. All right, so he becomes president and almost immediately enters into the Mexican-American War. So the Mexican-American War is from 1846 to 1848. 2 years war, kind of. These dates are a little bit soft. They're a little bit soft. Some of the battles continue after the war's over. They don't have telephones yet, so we don't always know when the war's over. So, but the 1846 to 1848 is the Mexican-American War. It's two main causes. I would say the most important cause is manifest destiny. Americans just are really bought into this concept of manifest destiny, that we are destined to control the entire continent from sea to shining sea, that it's going to be ours. And Americans have already started moving into the land. Americans are already living in California and Nevada and Arizona and Colorado. Americans already live there. We already started filling them up, even though the Mexicans didn't want us to. We just did it anyway. And so that's the number one issue, manifest destiny. The number two issue is Texas. Texas and Mexico had never really solidified the border. They'd never really agreed on what the border was. And Polk sends a unit of the Army, U.S. Army, down to help protect our little brothers of Texas, right? And they send that U.S. Army down right onto the border of what Texas claims it to be. And the Mexican Army is right there. And they say, if you walk back here, we're going to shoot you. And the Americans say, no, we're going to keep going. And they just keep on going, and the Mexicans shoot us. This allows Polk to say, whoa, hold on. The Mexicans shot first. Right? And so we're off to the war. Here's our map of the war, the map of everything that happens in the course of the war. Really, you don't need all of this blow to blow. You don't need all these separate battles. You don't need all that. What you need, what I think you should understand is that the first priority is California. We want to get California. So the U.S. Army invades its way to California, basically just runs as fast as you can to California. We take over New Mexico. We take over California. Our Navy lands here in California. We take that over. Right? So we take those over, and then we immediately fight through Texas as we start fighting our way down here. Americans end up fighting their way all the way down to Mexico City. We take over Mexico City way down here. Our Navy takes over Veracruz. Our Army comes in. We take over, the Marines take over Mexico City, and we take it over the whole country. Okay? The United States never really intended to keep Mexico. We didn't want to keep Mexico, but about half of Congress looks at this and they say, sweet, Manifest Destiny works south too, right? About half of Congress says, why don't we just keep Mexico? Let's just keep it. We'll just keep the whole thing, right? The biggest reason why we don't keep Mexico is the language. There's the further down you go, the more people there are, and they all speak Spanish down here. And Americans are scared that the country will have more Spanish speakers than English speakers. And so they're really freaked out about the idea of having too many Spanish speakers. And so instead, we just give it back. And at this point, Mexico's pretty poor. It's really poor. Mexico has been going through like a series of revolutions. Like their government hasn't been very stable, right? Like it's just kind of a mess. It's just kind of a mess. And Americans are not really sure that we're going to be able to produce more babies than the Mexicans. This is what it comes down to, right? They're just scared that it's going to be too many Spanish speakers. So we give it back. We signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. You do need that name, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. We signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which means that we get $15 million, we give them $15 million. They give us California, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado, and Utah. They consider it a good deal, even though we got Utah. We still call it a good deal.
Nice. So.
Okay. The other thing that you need, okay, the Wilmot Proviso. These are two vocab words that you need to have. Okay. The first vocab word you need is the Mexican Cession. Mexican Cession is the name for all the land we got from Mexico. That's this dark gray there, or this like lighter gray. That's called the Mexican Cession. So California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado. That's the Mexican Cession. And on the test, they will frequently, almost always, they'll use this term, Mexican Cession, right? So they'll say like, which of the following states was part of the Mexican Cession? And then they'll give you like 3 states names, 5 states names, right? Or they'll say something like, what cultural aspect do states from the Mexican Cession all have in common with each other, right? And then they'll give you information about it. So you will encounter the term Mexican Cession, okay? The other term that you're oftentimes going to encounter is something called the Wilmot Proviso. Wilmot Proviso, named after David Wilmot from Pennsylvania. David Wilmot from Pennsylvania was an abolitionist. He was an abolitionist in the Senate, and he proposed that when the United States buys all of the land, that we would prohibit slavery in the land. This is his proposal. His proposal fails. It fails, and it's therefore not very important because it failed. But the reason why it's in here is because it's going to really, really, really piss off the Southerners bad. And so the Southerners are going to look at this and they're going to say, oh my God, the Northerners are going to steal all of our land. Everything in the West is going to be free because they're going to be against us, right? The Southerners are going to start panicking for every single state that joins the Union. And they will constantly cite this, and they'll say, oh, you're just going to try to Wilmot Proviso us, right? You're just going to try to do this. That's why it's important, is because it pisses off the Southerners. It doesn't pass. Like, it's not a law, okay? On the test, it's most likely going to appear on the test as like a distractor. Like, it always shows up as a distractor in your multiple choice questions. It's like one of the most common distractors you're going to find. Cool? All right, we'll do one last thing and then I'm going to cut us off. All right, in 1847, this is happening during the Mexican-American War, the Mormons reach Utah. The Mormons reach Utah in 1847. All right, so this, of course, is some anonymous Mormon leader. We don't know who he is. I'm just playing. It's Brigham Young, of course. It's Brigham Young. Brigham Young appears, he comes to Utah. Um, for those of you who are not Mormon, I can tell you the story real quick, right? Mormonism shows up in New York. This is where Joseph Smith starts the religion. Brigham Young is an early convert to the religion. The Mormons are very unpopular with the Second Great Awakening Christians. They get driven out of New York. They get attacked and driven out of New York. They go to Ohio, at which point they get driven out of Ohio. They go to Illinois. They get driven out of Illinois. They go to Missouri. They get driven out of Missouri. Finally, Brigham Young says, screw this. I'm going to go to the worst place in the world, somewhere where no one will ever find me. We're going to go find the worst little stubby piece of desert that no one ever wants ever. And they head west and they find Utah. Right? At which point he says, yeah, this looks like a place. He doesn't say that. What does he say? None of you are Mormons. Grace, are you Mormon?
My family is.
Yeah? What does he say?
This is the place.
This is the place. That's what he says. He says, this is the place. According to Mormon tradition, God spoke to him and God gave him a revelation and told that Brigham Young that this is the place to be. Right? So they arrive in the Salt Lake Valley, bada bing, bada boom, put a lid on it, let it simmer for a while, you got Salt Lake City. Okay? Utah's different for a lot of reasons, but Utah, what matters for us is Utah is A, founded by Mormons, B, those Mormons immediately declare war on the United States and they attack the US Army. The Mormons declare independence from the United States. Unfortunately for the Mormons, they didn't realize it, but they're part of the Mexican cession. So the United States just paid $15 million for the land. Okay, so A, founded by Mormons. B, they declare war on the United States. C, what was I going to say? Oh, shit, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. It's different because Utah is founded with women. Utah has lots and lots of women. In fact, as you probably already know, many of the Mormon leaders are polygamists and have many, many wives. Not only do they have women, they got lots of women. Right? Why does that matter so much? Why does it matter so much that they have women? Eric, why does it matter so much?
They can have children.
Yeah. How many women do you think live in California at this time?
Not that many.
Very, very few. California at this time is about a 1 to 10 ratio, right? So one woman for every 10 men, right? California is almost completely men. It's all like mountain men and fur trappers and like miners and stuff like that, right? Utah's the only place that right away is going to create a sustainable population. Because it has women, they can produce babies and they can produce a sustainable population almost instantly. Okay. Utah actually has enough people to become a state by like 1850. Utah will not become a state until 1895. And that's because of polygamy. It's because of anti-Mormon bias and because of polygamy. Utah will apply for statehood not once, not twice, but 7 times and be denied. And be denied. Yeah, Utah gets denied statehood over and over and over again, and America just kind of looks at them and says, "I don't know, you're kind of weird. I don't like you." Right? Yeah. Eventually, they let Utah in. Eventually, they let Utah in. Eventually, Congress just kind of shrugs and says, "You guys are kind of weird, but I guess you're okay." Like, we don't want to have just a big hole in the middle of the country, so I guess we'll let you in. That's basically what it comes. All right, are we good? Do you guys have questions about Mexicans or Mormons or anything else? Questions going once? Questions going twice? Shiva is cold. Shiva, you need to turn the heat up in your house.
Yeah, it's already hot. I just like it hotter.
Oh, okay. It's hot. You just like to be cuddly.
Yeah.
There you go. All right, we're stopping the recording.